Author and Sky News All-Star Douglas Murray has been a vocal advocate for the victims of the attack on Israel by Hamas since the start of the war on October 7th. The outspoken commentator has immersed himself in the conflict, reporting from the front line and vigorously debating high-profile pro-Palestinian activists. In this Sky News All-Stars, we take a look at Douglas Murray's unwavering crusade to expose Hamas and hold the terrorist group to account. Douglas Murray clashed with pro-Palestinian guests on Sky News All-Star Piers Morgan's Uncensored program, firstly questioning their loose definition of jihad.
Let me speak. First of all, your first guest treated us to the first bit of mouthwash this evening by claiming that the word jihad can mean absolutely anything. Nonsense. When a big bearded member of Hizb ut-Tahrir calls for jihad on the streets of London, then they are not calling for an interpersonal struggle with the nature of the divine. They are calling for violence. And anyone who can't recognise that should be questioned about their own motives.
He then debunked casualty figures of the war supplied by Hamas.
Secondly, we've just been treated to a monologue about casualty figures in Gaza. Where do these figures come from? I'll tell you where they come from. They come from Hamas. It's quite remarkable to me that 2 months after the October the 7th massacre, the Israelis still don't know the precise number of people murdered on October the 7th. There's a reason for that, because it takes time to work out massacres of that scale. One of the striking, I just don't know if either of your guests are going to allow me a word in.
Because you are lying, and even the numbers from Israel, from the IDF, which are not accredited.
No. You will,
These are your
it's
numbers.
really interesting hearing somebody who presents themselves as a moderate being a spokesperson for Hamas. So let me continue. They are Hamas figures. They are all provided by the ministries of Hamas, which is a prescribed terrorist organization. If you want to reel off Hamas figures, then be my guest, but you are not able to mislead the viewers of Piers' show by quoting Hamas figures at his viewers as if they are holy
I am not
writ.
quoting.
Third,
it's the Euromed,
we've been treated to
it's
this
the
nonsense.
United Nations,
We've been treated,
it's the international community organizations.
Where do you think they get the figures from? Where do you think they get the figures from? Thirdly,
Douglas Murray also quashed claims that the conflict in Gaza has claimed more lives than World War II.
Thirdly, World War II. It is nonsense that what has been happening in Gaza has, as you said in this endless list of fallacies, that there has been more bombing in Gaza, more deaths and destruction in Gaza than during World War II. Do you know anything about World War II?
Almost,
do you know anything about World War II?
In Dresden
alone,
Germany. Do you know anything about
Dresden alone, take one German city. The destruction was on a scale totally dissimilar to what has been happening in Gaza.
I'm taking London.
very interested. I'm very interested, and I will, once again, finish this point, even if both of these boiled-hearts keep trying to talk over me.
Throughout this war, Douglas Murray has sought to expose Hamas as a terrorist organization and highlight the differences between the IDF and Hamas. He emphasized this point once again on Piers Morgan Uncensored.
It's very important for your viewers to hear the following definition. The definition of terrorism is the deliberate targeting of innocent civilians. That is what Hamas specializes in. That is what Hamas did on October the 7th.
And that's what is happening in Gaza also.
Is what Israel is doing terrorism? No, for the following reason. And again, you can lie about this if you want, but do not expect not to be challenged about it. What the IDF is doing is the same manner of war as the British Army, the American Army, and all other armies in the civilized world. They target terrorists like Hamas, and there are civilian casualties. Yes, there are. But it is not the aim of the IDF any more than it is of the British or American armies to target civilians. And anyone who pretends otherwise is lying to the public watching.
Douglas Murray also took aim at elite universities for encouraging the spread of anti-Semitism in a move he calls moral rot.
First of all, it's the result, as the Israeli president told me in an interview yesterday, of decades of moral rot in the universities. As you say, Rita, these are places where people have lost their jobs because they've identified the fact of biological sex and haven't been willing to lie about it. These are institutions that have banned, for instance, members of the Trump administration from speaking on campus. These are institutions that have spent years telling us all about microaggressions, which don't seem to care very much about the biggest form of aggression imaginable, genocide, who've told us all about, hurty feelings and the importance of stamping out hate, and who can't condemn the most obvious and evil and prominent form of hate in history when it's put to them in Congress. I mean, none of these people are fit for purpose. I said when I saw these smirking responses from people like that president of the Penn State University, the sort of I worked out at first, what's she doing? Why has she got this knowing grin on her face? And I realized, well, first of all, it's of course sort of legalese, isn't it? It's this kind of, I'm going to give you a clever legal answer that doesn't leave my institution open to legal cases brought by, for instance, Jewish students for harassment. So she thought she was doing something terribly clever. What also, finally, I thought, Rita, was these people were talking like ChatGPT. They were just rolling out this answer. And as it happened, I actually asked the same questions that these leaders of major universities in America were asked. I asked the same question to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT got it right. Said actually calling for genocide is regarded as being unacceptable. So here's the interesting thing. We've got to such a state in our universities that the people who lead the universities in America are actually less moral than AI.
He says the pro-Palestine stance is very much a younger generation trend, saying school children are on the side of the terrorists.
Yeah, I was once again not surprised, but very much shocked again by the protests you describe. It seems to be a generational issue. There's data to show that now, that where older people in Australia, America, and Britain, for instance, side with Israel in its fight against terrorism, the younger citizens of these free Western democracies seem to be on the side of the terrorists. And it's really quite remarkable. I say that, obviously there's some of the malevolent actors and the ones standing there in their fears and things as we watch it, are doing a form of terrorist chic on the streets of Australia. But there are also many other people at those protests who I say would perhaps 30 years ago have been at a protest for free Tibet. Remember that, Rita? You and I
yes.
remember that. The days when if you wanted to signal that you were a good person, you said free Tibet. And, it turned out that Tibet remains doggedly unfree. The Chinese Communist Party really turned out not to bow to the pressure of a few Devon-based sandal wearers. And they continue to repress the people of Tibet and to hold it. Of course, the situation with Free Tibet morphing into this generation has Free Palestine. Is that the Free Palestine call is a genocidal call. The Rivers to the Sea call is a genocidal call. And so, as I write, I hope these young people never get what they actually think they want. If they want a two-state solution, they should say so. But that's not what they're saying. They are talking about a Jewish-cleared Middle East, and that seems to me to be something they may well come back to regret having called for. But yes, it's a sort of chic thing, it seems, in this younger generation, in the same way that Free Tibet was. But there's one other difference which is important to state, which is, of course, one of the reasons that Tibet is not free is because the Chinese Communist Party is not vulnerable to students in Melbourne chanting. The Israeli government is, of course, a democratically elected government. It is actually vulnerable to national and international pressure when it grows. And so, this isn't such a benign call as even some of the people, the better people taking part in these protests, might imagine that it is.
In addition to anti-Semitism on university campuses, Douglas Murray also slammed the woke mainstream media for pushing an anti-Israel stance.
You'll notice that the New York Times has no love for Israel. The headline of this article, as I clicked on it this morning, as people around the world have clicked on it, is Israel knew of Hamas's battle plan. Now, I'm afraid that gives off a very particular spin to that particular cricket ball, doesn't it? Because unless you continue to read down and realize that what the paper is alleging is that some Israeli intelligence agencies had become aware of part of the plan, and I don't think there's any allegation they knew about all of it, and had, as you say, Rita, dismissed it as aspirational and unlikely. First of all, it's perfectly possible because, I mean, the number of threats, the number of plots that come across the desks of the intelligence agencies must be legion. I mean, just yesterday here, there was a shooting at a bus stop in Jerusalem. How do you stop that kind of thing? How do you intercept the evidence? Extremely difficult. That stuff's flooding over people's desks, presumably all the time. So a plan like this, the fact that it might have reached some desks is not surprising. But of course it will be proven to be one of the worst intelligence failures, certainly in 50 years in Israel, if this is the case. But I just think that it's amazing that the New York Times cannot resist on anything, putting a spin on the ball that basically plays into the hand of a sort of Alex Jones crowd on Israel, effectively. And then sadly, there's no shortage of those people out there.
And beyond Israel, Douglas Murray also exposed a dangerous anti-West agenda that emerged years ago but has ramped up since the start of the war.
I mean, I think it is actually the case. I've been thinking about a lot in recent weeks. Just the disparate events, Rita, that have been going off in different countries. Look at the way in which, for instance, in Ireland, this one migrant started stabbing children the other day, and the citizens of Dublin and elsewhere came out on the streets pretty violently, it has to be said, started burning police cars and much more, because they'd been saying that they didn't want this mass influx of people into their country, being completely ignored, and the response was that their Prime Minister said he'd clamp down on hate speech or speech laws and so on. Whatever one thinks of that, it's part of a sort of pattern. The Irish public were immediately called far right by their own elected representatives. Well, in the Netherlands, somebody who all of the media called far right for years, Geert Wilders, has just become the largest party leader in the Netherlands, and he plans to do things. He wants to do things like ban the Quran completely and start, large deportations of Muslims from the Netherlands. So you see all these things. You see the ugliness that's been let out of the sewers in America, where this week so-called pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel protesters couldn't even allow a Christmas tree lighting to occur in Rockefeller Center, the sweetest sort of traditions of the year in New York. They couldn't even allow that to occur without coming out on the streets with swastikas and anti-Israel bile. So there is a sort of feeling, I think, Rita, everywhere that the atrocities that occurred in Israel on October the 7th have actually sort of not just opened the sewers from Gaza, but from around the world. And, this is going to be a challenge for everybody.
But Douglas Murray can see the tide turning, with a push to conservative values seen in recent elections across the globe.
I think it's definitely a pattern. I mean, in country after country in Europe, many of which I know very well and have traveled to very many times and spoken to many politicians from across the different, perspectives. What you see is that there's been these years of attacking the publics for being against mass migration, and particularly, it has to be said, for being against mass Muslim immigration. And largely it's because they sort of had a bit of it and realized that there just don't seem to be enough very voluble moderates, which is of course what everyone wants desperately, is desperate for. And there are a large number of rather voluble extremists of the kind who turn out onto the streets in Sydney and elsewhere. And this has made the public very nervous, and understandably nervous. Then the public gets attacked by the politicians. Then any politician comes along to address it and they're called far right. And then the public public ends up sort of saying, well, you know, it could all be worse, so we'll just put our lot in with this person. As it happens, Wilders has people, you know, far further to his political side, including conspiracy theorists and much more. So he has, having done this for sort of 20 years, you know, he has come to seem like a far more reasonable and centrist person in Dutch politics, not especially because he's moved. He's said very similar things for the last 20 years, but because the public has moved. And 20 years ago, I remember I saw Geert Wilders in his office in the Netherlands, and he was the only member of his party, and he was sitting in a sort of broom cupboard in the Dutch Parliament. It was the only place they could protect him. And he's gone from being in that relatively brief period a one-man band to the leader of the largest party in the Netherlands.